Let's get underway here. It's so good to see all of you here this morning. This is our third in a series of forums that we're having with you. And I'm going to just explain this because we've got some new faces here today. This is an effort of ours to have members of the congregation who are interested to better understand really a lot of the aspects of the lay leadership of the church and the various ministries set up in session and what we're up to and what we're doing. And I think we've had some success with that so far. So I look around and I see folks who are interested in talking about finances and numbers. Well, I'm glad that you're interested in talking about it. And I've got with me here today the people you need to hear from because they're the ones in the know. We have our church treasurer, we have the chair of our finance committee, and as importantly, we have our church administrator. I've seen church administrator, I've seen business administrator. Scott, I prefer to say church administrator. Business just sounds so, what, business? But I think it'll go either way. So why don't the three of you introduce yourselves as we get started?
Yeah, so good morning. I am Amy Hunter, and I am serving as treasurer for the church. I've been in the church since about 2007, which is hard to believe. We were just talking about that. The time goes fast. And this is my second term on session. I served on session about 10 or 11 years ago. And yes, that's right. Terry and I were on it at the same time before. So this is just such a great way for me to help serve and be part of the organization, of the company. I mean, of the
business, the business.
Sorry, yes.
It feels like a company
feels
sometimes.
like a company at times, yes. So thanks for being here.
Good morning. I'm Ashley Friello. I serve as our finance chair. I've been a member of Covenant for about 10 years now. It blows my mind how quickly the time goes by, but it has been a wonderful community to be a part of. I served as vice chair of our finance committee last year and will roll into treasurer next year.
Good morning. I'm so excited to have a microphone. You just don't know. My name is Scott Mollenkoff. I joined Covenant a year and a half ago, roughly, June of 23. So I've been on staff in the church administrator role. Finance is one of the areas I have responsibility for. We have a small but mighty finance staff. Also have our communications team, operations folks, and the schools, which we'll talk a little bit about this morning, Child Development Center and a preschool. It's exciting to be here. My background is in business, but I have worked for, supported 4 other churches previously before coming to Charlotte. So look forward to talking and engaging with you this morning. Thank you.
You have your better half with you here this morning. Why don't you introduce her?
I do. My wife, Jill French, is here. We got married in May of last year on Pentecost Sunday, which was May 28th for those keeping track. And then later that week, we moved to Charlotte and I started working at Covenant. So it's been fast and furious. So thank you.
We're really glad. Yeah, sure. Well, let me open with a confession. We sort of brought you people here under false pretenses. We advertised this as a forum on finance. We're actually going to be a little broader than that. And we're going to talk about what's called the administration ministry here at Covenant. And because, as you'll see, hopefully, as we go through this morning, finance is sort of a part of the administration ministry. Now, Amy is treasurer. You are also chair of the administration ministry. Why don't you tell these folks what that is and what you folks try to do?
Yeah, I'll be glad to do that. And we pulled together a slide. Just, we thought it would be helpful just to kind of anchor everybody a little bit about how our ministry works. So I serve as chair of the administration ministry, and you can see as part of that ministry, we have several components. And as all good Presbyterians know, we have a book of order, but here at Covenant, we also have an operations manual that sort of says, how are we going to operate operate in accordance with the Book of Order. And so those responsibilities are laid out in the operations manual. And so the biggest part of the administration ministry is the finance committee, and we'll dig into that a little bit more. But I wanted you to kind of know that there are some subcommittees as part of the finance committee. We have the investment subcommittee, the scholarship subcommittee, and then also the audit subcommittee. So we have a variety of responsibilities as outlined in the operations manual that we have responsibility for. But we also have a property committee, which some people may be aware of, may not be aware of. We are extremely fortunate here at Covenant to have benefited from the really strong foresightfulness of people before us. And one of the things that we do have at Covenant is an endowment that's related to our Cornerstone Fund. It's called the Cornerstone Fund. And it's really put in place to help make sure we've got funds available for kind of long-term maintenance needs of the church. And so I think that's something that a lot of people may not be aware of, but it's something that people before us thought about and knew that we would need to be able to help maintain this beautiful campus that we have. And so we also have, so part of the property committee helps to, as you can appreciate, facilitate some of the different needs that we have, and sort of helping us think about that going forward and what we'll need from that standpoint. And then in 2018, as part of the visioning of the capital campaign, we added the CDC, or the Covenant Development Center, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we added that to our preschool that we have. So those schools also fall up under the administration ministry. So we want to just make sure we were giving you a little bit of context about how all of this fits together.
Yeah, good. That's good. Good overview. I failed to say this earlier. If you develop any questions during the course of the discussion here, I see a couple of you have your cards in your hand already. Just jot those down, and I'll have someone collect those, and we'll address those. I really want to make sure we leave enough time to answer any questions before we wrap up here today. But so remember to do that. So Amy, thank you. So if I look at your chart, I see that the Finance Committee is a part of the administration ministry, and that's where you are now, Ashley, in that you are the chair of the Finance Committee. I think you also are the assistant treasurer. And then next year, you become the treasurer and the chair of, you replace Amy, in other words, right?
That's right. I have big shoes to fill.
So talk to us a bit about the Finance Committee and what you folks accomplished.
Yeah, so the Finance Committee is responsible for the overall oversight of the fiscal health of the church. So we monitor monthly the financial statements, looking at how we're tracking to budget for the month, for the year. We're also responsible for administering scholarships. So we do have some scholarship funds available for undergraduate students with financial need or those pursuing ministerial studies. We do also work with an outside third-party auditor to complete an annual audit process. And then, as Amy mentioned, we have our investment subcommittee. So we do have, and you'll see in a moment, a large endowment, about $18 million of endowment funds. And we have an investment subcommittee responsible for making sure that those funds are well invested and the risk managed. And so that's something we talk about in our meetings as well.
I was going to just say that, one of the things that I've just been really thrilled about here at Covenant is the different way people can use their gifts and the strengths that they bring to the table. And I think the investment committee is a really great example of that. We've got people who do this in their work life, and they bring those great strengths to us as the Finance Committee. And so it's really a great way and a great demonstration of the way people can use their different gifts.
So the investment subcommittee, that consists of how many folks?
I think it's about five or six. Yeah. And Scott may know the exact number.
Correct. It's 5 folks.
And it meets regularly?
Yes, they meet quarterly with, and there's an outside investment advisor. We work with Wells Fargo, the Armillary Group, that provides professional financial planning support for this investment committee.
So we bring to bear resources outside of the church, although there are plenty of financial advisory resources here within the church. And I can speak to this, and those of you who've served on session before and the committee, the elder nominating committee, that is an aspect every year that we're looking at, is trying to bring in, whether they've served previously or a first timer, someone with a finance background to serve on session to then fill these committees that we're talking about. That is always a primary consideration when we get involved in the elder nominating situation. We're going to jump around a bit today, but I want to make sure everyone has a good overall understanding. Let's talk about the operating budget for just a moment, please. And Scott, maybe you can help us here. And I think we've got a good slide. Yeah, this is a really, really good slide. Scott, maybe you can use that sort of to talk about, first, maybe our key income sources here at Covenant, and then maybe touch upon our expenses. Does this chart help you?
It does. I'll have to work from memory because these eyes are just a little bit older today. So the top is our income, $6.7 million budget for 2024. 51% of it is in pledges. And so those are, we're accumulating pledges now for 2025. So we accumulate pledges for the next year. And use that as a major source of driving the operating budget. So this is what we would refer to as our annual operating budget. It's the main source of funding the church for expenses, for ongoing expenses. So you can see the majority of it comes through our pledge and pledge income, which once the pledge is made, we then need to receive the pledge during the following year. The next largest slice of the income is our schools, which comprise of both the Child Development Center, or CDC, and our preschool. That number's roughly 29% of the total. And the CDC is the biggest majority of that. 75% of our school income comes through the CDC. And then, help me out.
You take that.
So the next biggest piece of the income is at 8%, which is other income, and those are going to be things like, we're going to talk a little bit about micro businesses. We have a food service area that we use, and we sell to the outside public. We have a recreation center that also generates some outside income. We are a 7-day-a-week operation because this facility and some other of our facilities get used for outside groups, and so we have a facilities income line. We also have miscellaneous contributions. Those are other pledges, or excuse me, other contributions that come in that weren't pledged. So people just come in, they visit with us, or some folks don't actually make a pledge but regularly contribute, and so we'll record that through there. And then we have investment income. We mentioned the endowment, which is $17 or $18 million at the moment. We have about $300,000 a year that comes off of that and runs through the operating budget to help support that next year's expenses. And then to just highlight where we're spending the money, using the money for expansion of the kingdom work, the biggest item is personnel, which is 45% of our total budget. And within that personnel is all of the personnel to operate the church except for the schools. So within the schools number, we report up the staff and personnel costs for both the CDC and preschool. We have about 100 folks on staff between part-time and full-time, so it's a fairly large employer as well as a church-focused operation. Schools are the second largest piece. We operate the schools to be break-even, so what we hope to charge and bring in, we want to cover all their expenses, the majority of expenses. The next largest item is administration, which are all of the staff and administrative costs. That's utilities, keeping the lights on, paying for the operating focus of the church. Mission and outreach is 9% of the budget. In the operating budget, it's about a $600,000 line item, but there's an awful lot of other monies that flow to the mission and outreach through other areas outside the operating budget. And Then we've got couple smaller pieces. Our worship, congregational life, and our education ministries make up the larger piece of the last section.
Thanks, Scott, for that explanation. I think that's a great chart to have. I just want to ask you folks, how many of you were surprised, either thinking it's too low or too high? 51% of the budget income, only 51% is pledge. Personally, I thought that was a little bit low. I'm seeing other folks agreeing with that, but fortunately there's so many other sources, including the schools and the investment income. Clearly we rely heavily upon pledges, but that's only one component of our income situation. Scott, with the respect to the 45% of the operating expenses being personnel, is there, as far as you know, a sort of a guideline or what's an optimal number, percentage of your operating expenses devoted to personnel? I had personally at one point when I served on personnel years ago that 50, try to keep it below 50%, which we clearly do. Is there anything to that?
Yeah, there is. And so all I'll do is put things in the light for you to consider. What I'll say is the 45% is mathematically correct, but it is 45% of 6.7 million, which includes the school's income. So that 45% personnel does not really reflect an apples to apples, if you will.
Right.
So what I would say is, we're in the ballpark for a large church. You'd like your administration costs to be 60% is on the upper range of it, and we're probably in the mid to upper 50s if you really adjust the math. And I just have to tell you that, right? So I don't want you thinking 45% is as good as it looks. It's wonderful.
Right.
This is a very complex organization with a lot of pieces, but that 45% is mathematically correct. I mean, and Amy, you can jump in.
I think she wants to.
Yeah.
You can qualify, but
No, I appreciate you saying that. I think the point I just wanted to make is, as a church, we have a variety of different ways that we provide mission and ministry, and one of the ways that we have chosen to do that is through the schools. And so you see, the CDC and the preschool, so that is a part of that. But Scott is exactly right, and I appreciate him, kind of commenting on that and raising that. But it's just kind of making sure, that this group knows that there are other mission ways that we give and provide that input, and that is one of the things that kind of comes through on the slide as well.
I think so. Mayor Parrish, we're going to do it. That's good.
Yeah, so just to repeat the question for those who are the observation for those who are with us virtually, the Mary Parrish was asking about is this just the operating budget, and aren't there other ways that giving happens through things we've been supporting with Avery County? And she's exactly right. So this is the operating budget. So the way we think about it is this is how we need to run the kind of everyday components of the church. Outside of that, this church is extremely generous and extremely thoughtful about the way we support the communities and provide mission. And there are other donations that are given. We call those, in our parlance, donor-restricted gifts, right? So somebody has said, I want this to be for something particular. And that is not included in what you see here. So it's a great point.
Yep, and we'll talk about that a little bit further when we discuss the endowment fund. Yep. Yeah.
Right. I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but I think it's important for folks to understand that our operating budget isn't established or set by a handful of people who sit down and decide what the priorities are. Who's going to speak to this process, how we begin our budgeting process and how it's established?
I'll start and let you guys chime in. So, again, in good Presbyterian fashion, we have a good process here that we follow with regards to the budget. And I like to think about it as it's kind of a bottoms up, but also a top down view. So the treasurer works, we have a budget advisory committee that is made up of all of the ministry chairs who provide that input. Scott also works very closely with the chairs as well as the internal staff that are responsible for the different areas to get the budget pulled together. And we think about it, both if we had a little extra, how would they spend money? But we also ask them to think about if pledges don't come in quite where we think they might, what would they think about adjusting from that standpoint? But Scott, maybe if you don't mind, could you give just maybe a little more color around some of that process or add anything to that if there's...
Yeah, one of the key things when you're budgeting is, and there's lots of different ways to do a budget, but the methodology that Covenant's used for several years now is to start with next year's budget being equal to this year's budget. And one of the things that does is it anchors the ministry teams into the reality that says you don't have to spend your budget just to get your next year's budget. So there's great fiscal discipline here. The ministry teams, from the staff to the ministry leaders to the ministry teams, they're engaging the money and using those resources, again, for the kingdom work. But that's a really key budgeting methodology choice. It's one that, frankly, I've never used before coming here. And I will tell you, in my second season of doing it, it makes a lot of sense. It really does work. It helps conversations. And as Amy mentioned, there's some upside planning that we ask the ministry teams to do and some downside planning. So we have a very tight budget schedule at the end because we work from real data. We want to know what happened this year when we finish 2024. And so we're meeting with the Budget Advisory Board in December to initially give them a look. But we also need to wait for those pledges to come in. And we don't really lock down on pledges until that first or second week in January. And that's when the numbers really sort of firm up. And then we're working pretty quickly to get it in front of session for session's approval about the third week in January. And then it's brought to the congregation at the end of January to be presented, along with a congregational vote for terms of call for the installed pastors. So I'd say it's a really robust process. It's heavily engaged with the lay leadership and the key heads of staff.
And as I recall, there's constant communication with the heads of the ministries throughout the year, asking them to monitor their expenses and to see if there need to be modifications. That's right.
Right. That's something that the Finance Committee will review each month to see how the different ministry areas are tracking and if there are any concerns from an expense management standpoint. But as Scott mentioned, our leadership and our staff do a great job managing their budgets, and so we have a lot of confidence.
Yeah, and sometimes finance will come alongside somebody if they could use some additional support. I think that's the other thing that we've been successful in doing is kind of being a resource as the different teams are working through either things through an operating year or through their budgeting process. Yeah.
Well, we'll defer to questions from the audience here, the exciting questions about this process, this budgeting process. But let's move on here. A couple of you, I think, have used this phrase micro businesses in talking about the operations of Covenant. Who wants to tackle that and talk about and sort of what you're talking about there? It makes sense. Let's talk about it.
Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So I mentioned a couple of them. The largest one, of course, is the CDC. And that's about $1.5 million operation we have 20 teachers and 4 administrative staff. It's a 5-star licensed operation, which is wonderful to have, and we're at the top licensing for the state. The capacity there is about 88 students. And the goal, one of the key mission piece in there was for those 88 students, you all decided you wanted 25% of those students to get any financial assistance they needed to come in to participate in the school. And the target right now is 50% of the tuition to be subsidized through financial assistance. So we're looking to get about 22 of those 88 seats filled with financial assistance folks. So that's a big micro business. Takes a lot of time. It's very hands-on. We've got excellent leadership at the moment through there. Janice Price is our managing director for the CDC and the preschool. We also run food service as we don't think of it as a business, although when we're charging for the outside, we do make sure we cover our cost and have some margin to help pay for the overhead. Our recreation ministry area is another area where we have outside income that comes in, and we have memberships there. We do programming there, but all of these are focuses on the mission, which is the kingdom work first and cover your costs. And if we're working with the public, just treat it as a business enterprise. And then facilities income, which has grown tremendously in the last year and a half. It's becoming a fairly sizable income line item. And it's
Describe describe what that involves.
yeah, so, I mean, this space is a great space. We have any number of activities that happen in here from, an example last year was Greer Heights Presbyterian Church, which is a fellow Presbyterian church in the area. They were looking to celebrate, I think, their 75th or 80th anniversary, and they asked us, could they come here and have that celebration? So on a Friday night at 6 o'clock, they brought over 200 people in here. And if you've ever had Chef Johnny's food, it's wonderful. But we also do all the hospitality work. We set it up for them. It's an event planning enterprise. And oh, by the way, on that particular day, the power went out at 5 o'clock, 1 hour before they were showing up. So our operations team had to scramble. And so we look forward to doing that for other folks, but we're also open to the community. We have a medical center that's being built right across the street on Moorhead. We're going to have a lot of folks looking for a place for lunch, looking for a place to sit and find a little bit of respite. We have 100 construction workers up and down Dilworth every day. That's wonderful opportunities for discipleship and engaging through food, through recreation, through our physical space. And I'll say our staff really embrace that. It is not about the money. It's about putting the light and love out there. And the money is just something we welcome.
Icing. Did you want to add something, Amy? If not, I want to. So we didn't necessarily plan to talk about this, but I think folks may be intrigued. You talked about the 25% of the students in the CDC with financial assistance. There's a process for that too, right? There's a group of folks who work on that. Speak to that, one of you.
Yeah, that's right. So we have a CDC advisory board, and one of the ways that finance and the administrative ministry helps to support that is we provide somebody to sit on that advisory board with them. We also work with them and a lot with Scott's support and help of kind of their financial model that they need to make sure that it's running effectively, and they have a very dedicated group of individuals that help support Janice in figuring out ways to identify candidates for the financial assistance and kind of helping to support that.
And I would just add to when the CDC was established, the team who spearheaded that at the time had the foresight to make sure that we went ahead and set aside some funds for our CDC Financial Assistance Fund so that there would be sustainability and being able to continue to provide financial assistance to the children as part of the school. So that's something we monitor as a financial committee as well, just making sure that that continues to be sustainable.
Did I give one of you an opportunity to talk about the preschool operation, one of the other little businesses we have here? Scott, you were going down the list. Did you get the preschool?
I mentioned it, but yeah, the preschool is 5 days a week, half-day program roughly. We can serve about 130. We're serving just under 100 students, children in there today. We have a part-time assistant director and 18 staff, part-time staff that are serving through the preschool. It's a wonderful way to introduce folks again to the life at a church property, but also give them an opportunity to have time for their child to be with us.
When you raise your microphone, that makes me think you want to say something.
Yeah, I forget. No, I think Scott covered it. I just wanted to make sure. Ashley had mentioned a kind of a piece of the endowment fund, so I didn't know if it made sense for us to kind of transition into that, Terry, if there's something else.
Yeah, we will do that. I just want folks to understand this thing, when we use the term micro businesses within the church, that may be off-putting to some folks, and I get that. But if you don't operate these, have a business, a model for each one, then you run afoul, you get in serious trouble. And so I'm hoping these comments provide some assurance to you folks that those are being operated closely, the budgets are monitored, income is monitored, and that's the point to convey with all that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think, we want to do it with the right focus in mind, but also with a healthy fiscal focus, just to make sure that we can maintain what we want to do going forward. So, yeah.
All right, well, we've teased up the endowment quite a few times already. So, Ashley, I believe you're going to start off our discussion on the church endowment, correct?
Yeah, happy to speak to the endowment, and I'll just take a step back just a minute to comment on our balance sheet. We have a very strong, healthy balance sheet. We are very fortunate as a church to have so many resources available to us, and really it's just a reflection of how generous our members are. So we have no debt as part of our balance sheet, which is fantastic. There are many churches, my understanding is, who do carry debt, and we are very fortunate not to carry any debt. As well, we mentioned there's the $18 million endowment. So those are funds outside of our annual operating budget that are available for use within certain terms or restrictions as far as how that money was set up to be used. So for example, Amy had mentioned our Cornerstone Fund, which is used for the long-term maintenance of the church. So making sure that our beautiful campus and our buildings can continue to be maintained, as well as our CDC Financial Assistance Fund that we just mentioned. And then we have our different restricted funds, scholarship money, as well. The Mission and Outreach has a separate restricted fund as well. So there are resources outside of the annual operating budget. Talking about the endowment a little bit more in terms of how it's invested, this is something our investment subcommittee really dives into. They partner with an outside financial consultant to make sure that they are staying plugged into what's going on in the market. Are there any tactical moves they need to make within the portfolio? But generally, the portfolio is invested in a diversified, balanced portfolio, primarily mutual funds, ETFs. We are very conscious about having diversified fund managers, also looking at making sure we're managing the expenses associated with the portfolio as well. So we have a very conscientious committee that helps oversee that for us.
Actually, would you want to just touch briefly on how the income calculated, that piece, and that might be of interest?
Thank you, Amy. Yep. And so as you can see in our income line item for our operating budget, there is a portion that we spin off from the endowment every year. So essentially we take a 4% distribution from that endowment money and use that towards our annual operating budget. So that just continues to help provide additional resources to our operating funds throughout the year.
That's the investment.
It is. It's a rolling average, the way it gets calculated. That's a great question. Yeah.
Back to your... Sure, not a problem. Great question, Mike.
That's a great question. And so just to rephrase the question, it's how does the committee make considerations for being, whether it's environmentally focused, or sustainably focus in our investments. And that is something that they take into consideration. And one of the charges that we gave our investment committee from session when a lot of racial justice issues were surfacing was making sure that we took equity in perspective in terms of looking at our fund managers and supporting those minority fund managers, but also, as you mentioned, Mike, thinking through, what's the faithful way to use our funds and how we want to move in the world and see Christ move in the world. And so that is something they take into consideration. Certainly, we're not going to invest in something just because maybe something is environmentally friendly. We're also going to look at, are they performing? So we balance both of those objectives.
I think that's good to hear. Ashley, going back to your talk about the endowment, now we're to understand that the general endowment and the Cornerstone Fund are entirely different. Is that correct?
So the way I would describe it is the endowment is made up of a series of different restricted funds.
Okay.
So a lot of times we talk about the endowment as a general kind of overarching endowment, but when you drill down into it, it's a series of different restricted funds that are
Cornerstone
available.
being one.
Our operations manual, and Scott, you can help make sure, but our operations manual allows us to put it together to be able to get the best return that we can in that pool of dollars. And then behind the scenes, what we do is make sure in the accounting that we're making sure we've got that appropriately delineated and are tracking that appropriately.
Amy, while you've got your mic up, I know in session in the last year, you've come forward to us with requests for funding through the Cornerstone Fund. I need to describe what it's about, but maybe it'll help folks to understand what the Cornerstone Fund is intended to do by talking about some of those expenditures.
Yes, so what we ask kind of the property committee to help us with, and what finance helps to kind of oversee, is we ask them to sort of put together sort of a 5-year plan of what the expenditures will be. So they have a set amount that, Ashley mentioned that they receive from the endowment income to be able to spend each year. And so working with Scott and with William and with Zeno, Scott and the property committee will kind of look at that and sort of lay out what do we want to spend that income over the next 5 years. And what we bring to session is to help approve what we're going to spend in the next year, because you can appreciate those things change, and what our priorities might need to be will change from year to year. And then we always bring back an update to session to kind of say, how are we doing with what we had planned to spend? And I think this year it was the roof
Yes.
and the water heater. Yeah. On the water heater. I'm trying to remember. Okay. Yeah, so, yeah.
Yeah, we put, is this still? Yeah. So this building has a new roof and new HVAC system. Those were the two major projects. And then a water heater system for our kitchen, which is also here.
Cornerstone Fund.
Cornerstone funded, yeah.
I just wanted folks to understand, get some idea of what those are. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here. Oh, there's another question.
How do you build the endowment?
The Cornerstone Fund, particularly, or the yes. So the question was kind of how do we grow the endowment? How do we focus on that? So that is part of the charge of the finance committee, is to be thoughtful about how we think about the building of those funds, and that is probably something that we need to continue to kind of ascertain and figure out what the right way to do that is. It's a great question, Bruce. We know that, and so one of the things we're working with Scott and William on particularly is we know we have an aging infrastructure, and so what we've asked them to do is to sort of help us figure out what that big pot looks like, so that we can be thoughtful about that before we go and ask of what the need might be. Yeah.
And I'll just add on to that. I think forums like this are really great opportunities for us to share about the endowment funds and what's available out there. There are many ways that members can contribute outside of their annual pledges. So we do have members who may give restricted money to the church outside of their annual giving. We also see estate gifts as well, and other memorial gifts. So there are a lot of ways that you can continue to support Covenant.
This concept, restricted gifts, somebody talk about that. Maybe, certainly not any names or anything like that, but maybe an example or project that someone wanted to specifically fund.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, for example, we have a scholarship fund that was established for individuals who are pursuing ministerial studies. So there was a member of the church at the time who felt very passionately about this and wanted to be able to provide this resource to members. So that was something that they established, and our members are able to apply for those scholarships. And we're very fortunate to be able to support people with that.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. Each of you, if there's anything, any overriding principle, concern, or what you want to convey to this group about your work. Amy, we'll start with you.
So I just am really grateful for people using their gifts in various ways. And what I would just want to convey is we have a really good financial discipline that we have in place. And also, I just will say that I think we've mentioned it a couple of times. There are a variety of different ways that you can support the church, and pledging, though, is one, and that is really helpful as we think about that budgeting process. And so just very appreciative for this congregation's generosity and focus on mission and providing. So I think that it's really thrilling for me to be able to be part of that.
Yep, and I would just echo the same sentiment, just a lot of gratitude for the members of this church. We are very blessed and very fortunate to have so many people who are engaged and love our programming, and we're able to provide such quality programs. So just a lot of gratitude.
Yeah, I continue to be, I'm surprised and amazed, but feel very blessed that it's such an engaged congregation. With not always clarity on day one, but clarity over time. And so all of these gifts that come in, and money is just one of them, get focused and get used and are put in the world to, again, bring God's light and love to it. And so those of us that are on staff, many of us worship here, but many of us worship other places. And we're constantly reminded that we work for you. So the more you tell us and the more you give us direction is just fantastic. And it's extremely engaged in an incredibly highly talented group of elders and lay leaders that really make this place go. So it's a joy, truly is.
That perspective is particularly interesting coming from you, given the few number of years you've been here, although we certainly hope that there will be many, many more to come. I hope you all agree with me that, and again, this is just the leadership of our administration and our finance. And there are a lot of very strong, committed, and devoted people who work with them, as you can tell, to staff these ministries. So if you would join with me in just a moment of applause for these folks and all the work that they do for us. Now, did anyone jot down any questions that you'd like to have us take a look at? If you don't mind passing that, that'd be great.
I'll try.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Janet, one of you, if you guys have any questions. I think David is working on one here. But let's go with this one, and one of you can deal with that. So what percentage of pledges are unfulfilled? The answer is the vast majority of them are fulfilled, okay? So let's be positive about that, but is there some notion, some idea about that? Everyone
Do you
wants
have
to
more
answer.
detail on that?
Each year, we do take that into account, right, when we're planning the budget to make sure that we're just being diligent and thoughtful about pulling that together. I don't know off the top of my head what the percentage is. I don't know if you know, Scott, or if there's a trend that that you can add. If not,
What I would say is it's the last couple years that we've looked at, we've been right at 99%. So I'd say that's very good.
I do know that at the end of every year, Bob, and I talk to you sometimes, Scott, it's a little stressful time, isn't it?
Well, so a good example is we've just finished 10 months of the year financially. So you look at our October financials, and we're doing well compared to the budget. And in the next 2 months, in order to fulfill our pledge income that was expected, we need over $700,000 to still come in. So that's just the size of the budget and the way the money flows, which a significant portion comes in, as you might imagine, in December. So we do count on it, and we're grateful that it's such a high percentage.
And then I'll just add, on the flip side of that, we also have some members who do not pledge but still give to the church. So there's some of those funds as well that are a little bit harder to account for.
Folks, I'll tell you something. We've got some fantastic questions up here. Gordon, I keep checking. This is not to keep up with news or anything. I'm simply trying to keep ourselves with time here. So I'm showing 1017. I would say this: if you need to leave at any time, don't hesitate to do that. But I think you folks are here to answer these questions. We've got some really good questions here. The first one is sort of a facility usage question. How do you decide which groups to allow to use our space and whether to charge them? I know we have a facility usage policy. Does anybody want to take that one?
Well, one of the overriding things is we do not have our facilities used for things that you can imagine a Christian organization wouldn't want here. So we're not interested in political, anything that's socially volatile, but we are an open, encouraging place. So we have a broad swath of things that we'll allow, with very few things that are exceptions. And if there's ever a question, we will raise it up through to leadership. And as far as how we charge folks, again, we're not looking to make a margin, so to speak, but rather cover our cost. And our mission and outreach folks, if they come to us and say, we've got a mission and outreach partner that needs the space, we're certainly accommodating those. So it's driven by, as you would hope, I think, the kingdom work, and the policies are set around that.
Did the capital campaign from a few years ago fund the endowment at all, or were funds principally directed towards certain designated projects?
That's a great question. So the capital campaign, the money that was raised, when you think about the funds for the CDC, for example, that is a component of our ongoing endowment. So that money that's set aside to continue to sustain the CDC, that is part of the endowment. So it may not have been necessarily a contribution to the endowment general fund, so to speak, but it was given with a distinct purpose to continue to be managed for the ongoing use of that program.
With regards to vendor costs, do we get any leverage from outside covenant, or do we negotiate everything on our own? For instance, pension, health care, telecommunications, etc. We've had a lot of discussion about some of these issues recently. Who wants to talk about that, the notion of outside costs?
Yeah, so we're negotiating with our staff leading those negotiations, but we welcome any and all help we can get. We work with, on our healthcare plan, we have an outside broker that helps us facilitate. They work with a lot of churches around the country. We recently changed we had a longtime IT consultant who was supporting our IT work. We've gone with an outside firm. So we regularly enlist advice, ideas, and help from you all and anybody who's got expertise. But our staff are principally negotiating those contracts.
This is an interesting question someone raises. How has giving changed since the pandemic?
That's a great question. I think from what I understand about nonprofits as a whole is when we go through times and we recognize there's a great need, we often see people stepping up to fulfill that need. And I think that's something that we saw at Covenant as well. I think that's kind of a universal pattern across nonprofit organizations. We've been very fortunate especially last year when we went through the budgeting process, we did have some additional pledge commitments that allowed us to allocate additional funds to the additional ministry areas. So we've been very fortunate to continue to see our income grow over the years.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think Covenant has been extremely fortunate. We have seen, growth in people joining the church. If you just see the number of babies that we're having baptized and the additions that we're seeing, that has continued to be very beneficial to us. Just with any folks that we might have had who have gone fully virtual to joining or et cetera. So each of us have a component in that of making this a place where people feel welcome, where they want to come to be part of that. And so my overall sentiment is Covenant has been very fortunate to be able to sustain our pledges.
I would also just add that one maybe obvious but significant change since the pandemic is online giving has increased tremendously. I mean, people literally weren't coming to church for months or even longer than that during the pandemic. The other thing that's affecting how giving is flowing is the demographics. Honestly, the younger generations aren't really pledgers as much as those of us that were raised that way in a different time. But the giving is still coming in. And we're looking at early pledge data for 2025, and we had a record number of members last year, and a significant portion of those folks are pledging because we can see new members pledging in the data. So it's a good mix, but it just keeps coming.
How are undesignated gifts handled?
That's a great question. So any gifts that are undesignated, they come through the finance committee for consideration. So we look at, what are our highest priority items of the church? Are there areas where immediate funds are needed? And we will allocate that money as appropriate.
Can I give a
Sure,
real example
absolutely.
of that? We had some undesignated money come in last year, and for those of you that might notice, we have some new sidewalk areas. We expanded around the magnolia tree as the magnolia tree's roots were going into the parking lot, and we thought it'd be important to save God's creation there for as long as we can and put some speed bumps in the upper parking lot. All of that money came from an undesignated gift that finance approved for those expenditures.
This individual asked if Covenant is committed to providing a living wage to all its staff. I want to address that.
So I would ask staff, but I would say yes. In our heart, we are. It's one of those very serious topics that we take through personnel every year, and Covenant looks at the consistency of earnings and earning raises, but also the benefit package. So, but I would encourage you to ask the staff, all of them, and let them tell you. But we believe so.
This is a question. If an individual feels that they're going to have difficulty meeting their pledge because of changing circumstances, what is the best way to convey or communicate that?
Let us know. Talk to us. This is we appreciate the pledge. We understand what it means. And we certainly hope that they're always honored, but life happens. And I've had a handful of those conversations. Most of them will generally find their way to either me or to Bob. And we will do what we can to work with those folks. And at the end of the day, you can do what you can do. And priorities do shift, and life happens.
And we appreciate the conversation, because then we can think about it from our financial standpoint as well. So, yeah.
And I would just add, those conversations are treated with confidentiality. So
Absolutely.
if there is, something going on in your life and you're not able to give your pledged amount, certainly we take great compassion and care in what you share with us.
But communication would be appreciated, I think is the point. Well, we're going to finish off with a line of questions here. One of them phrases as follows: what is our next biggest financial need at the church? And I like this phrase: what are the, quote, big ticket, close quote, items for the next few years? Put on your prognosticating hats here and tell us what you think about that.
Fantastic question.
I do too. What you folks ought to be thinking about.
Yes, and that is something we think about as a finance committee, and we are starting to make sure that as we change leadership each year, that the priorities of the church and an understanding of, where are those gaps where we can continue to fill in or do better or do more, continue to share that information. I think one area that we've identified is with our Cornerstone Fund. We do have a large aging campus, and there are always ongoing needs. So I think that's one area that we continue to closely monitor to make sure that our Cornerstone Fund can continue to sustain those needs, as well as our CDC Financial Assistance Fund, making sure that we have the funds available in there to continue providing that financial assistance to students.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, I think those are two great things, is, the session has been going through an envisioning process to start to ask those exact questions as to what's next. And I really want us to kind of lean in, because that process was sort of all inclusive to that. And so there's some good, thoughtful things that the P&E is kind of helping us think through and address. And so it'll be just a really good way to kind of continue to see how we can really lean in and help here with regards to kind of where we see ourselves over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's a great point. How can we continue to do more and sustain the great programs and facilities that we have?
So I would love to just end my comment on that question with, I think the next big thing will come from you all in terms of the direction. I mean, affordable housing is one area that the church has been very active in and continues to be active. But I will say, from the look I have, those 100 or so folks that you have working for you on staff are very grateful and appreciative of their jobs. And through the Envision report, it talked about the quality of that staff. And I've worked a number of places over my career. This is an outstanding group of people from top to bottom. And if there's a way to get your money into the operating budget, that's where we know we've got the certainty, or the higher degree of certainty, to continue to pay the right wage, the living wage that can attract and retain this quality staff. So we're appreciative every time a gift comes in that is for a project or for affordable housing or some other mission and outreach. But through the operating budget is where we're able to drive that personnel, the results. So I think about that, and I can tell you this year has been very challenging on the vast majority of that staff because of the wonderful growth that's happened. And I just hope we can continue to attract and retain them through one form of that.
Let me just add one thing to what you said there, Scott. You referenced the Envision process. I can tell you folks that staff retention was one of the most often mentioned, various ways of course, the most often mentioned concern is that we have a real strategy, A, recognition we need to, and B, a strategy to do all we can to retain staff. And I can tell you that in the personnel committee process, that's uppermost in our minds as we deliberate also. So I think that's important to remember. Well, Grace, I would say we probably could have run this forum by having good questions from these folks without having any questions from me. So I wish we had opened it up to questions earlier. I appreciate your attention, and I appreciate these fantastic questions. Challenged them a little bit too, and that's a good thing. That's what we're here for. Well, thank you all very much. Let's close in prayer if we could, please. Gracious and loving God, we give thanks for the mission and work of Covenant, for our lay leaders and dedicated staff who make it possible, and for all of us who support them with our treasure and our time. Help us to always be mindful of our commitment to boldly proclaim the gospel, to bravely work toward a brave and whole world, and to passionately nurture discipleship. In your blessed name we pray. Amen. Thank y'all.